I was house-sitting for a friend while she was traveling, and since her house was a bit isolated, I decided to invite 2 friends over to spend the night and keep me company. The evening started off calmly. We watched movies, chatted, and played with her dog, who was super excited to have extra company. Around 9 o'clock, the landline phone rang. I thought it was strange because hardly anyone uses a landline anymore, but I answered it anyway, thinking it might be something important. The voice on the other end was male and sounded low, almost too calm. He said he had lost a wallet and insisted that we go to a nearby gas station to pick it up. I was immediately suspicious and told him he must have the wrong number, then hung up. My friends also thought the call was strange, and we tried to laugh it off to break the uneasy mood. But no matter how much we tried to brush it off, the weird request and the calm tone of that man still echoed in my head. We decided to lock all the doors and windows, just to be safe, and went back to the living room to continue our evening. A few minutes later, we heard a faint noise coming from the kitchen, like something had bumped against something else. At first, we thought it might be the dog, but he was lying beside us. The tension came rushing back, and we sat there in silence, trying to figure out if there was really someone in the house or if we were just being paranoid. Gathering courage, we went to the kitchen to check, hoping it was just our imagination playing tricks on us. But when we got there, we saw a dark figure standing in the middle of the room, as if he was waiting for us. It was a man's silhouette, unmoving, but he seemed too calm for someone who had just broken into a house. For a moment, we were paralyzed, unsure of what to do. As soon as he noticed our presence, he simply turned and walked out the back door, without any hurry, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. There were no words, no attempt to hide his face. The calm with which he left only made everything more terrifying. As soon as he disappeared into the darkness outside, panic set in. We didn't know if he was waiting outside or if he had actually left, but one thing was clear. Staying in that house was not an option. We grabbed our things in a hurry, called the police, and left as quickly as possible, without even looking back. The feeling of vulnerability, knowing that someone might have been watching us the whole time, was deeply unsettling. When we reached the car, still in shock, we tried to process what had just happened. My hands were shaking as I started the engine, and we looked around, expecting to see the man emerge from some corner of the darkness. We decided to drive straight to one of my friend's houses, where we finally managed to call the police and tell them every detail. When we explained about the call and the man in the kitchen, they took us seriously and said they would send a patrol car to check the area. But even with that assurance, the thought of going back there to get more information or to check on the house's safety was out of the question for us. We spent the rest of the night awake, trying to understand what would drive someone to act like that. Was the man the one who had called, trying to lure us to the gas station to get us away from the house? Or had he been watching for a while, knowing we would be there alone? The next morning, we received confirmation from the police that they hadn't found any trace of the intruder, but the back doors were unlocked, indicating that he had entered and exited with ease. The experience left a lasting impression on us, and I knew I would never agree to house sit for that house or any other again. Working as a pet sitter has brought me many interesting experiences, but nothing prepared me for that week. I was hired to take care of a dog in a suburban house while the owner was traveling. The house was cozy, in a quiet neighborhood, and the dog, a Labrador named Max, was adorable and easy to handle. At first, everything seemed normal, and I spent the first day exploring the house, making sure Max was comfortable and happy. But on the very first night, I noticed something strange. When I went down to the kitchen, I saw that the back door was slightly open. I was sure I had closed it before heading to bed. I thought maybe I'd made a mistake, so I just shut it again and tried not to think too much of it. Over the next few days, however, small details began to bother me. Several times, doors I was sure I had closed appeared open, and some objects seemed to be in different places. One night, while I was in the living room watching TV with Max beside me, I heard footsteps coming from upstairs. I froze for a moment, my heart racing. I knew the house should be empty, and the only sound I should be hearing was Max beside me. The idea that someone might be entering the house without my knowledge started to make me feel increasingly uneasy. The following night, things got even stranger. After putting Max to bed, I went upstairs to the room I was staying in, and when I reached the hallway, I saw that the guest room door was open, even though I was sure I had closed it earlier. A chill ran down my spine, but trying to stay calm, I walked over to the room and closed the door again. I lay down, but sleep wouldn't come. The house was completely silent, except for occasional sounds from outside. Then I heard footsteps again, this time coming from the hallway outside my room. The footsteps were slow and steady, as if someone was deliberately pacing back and forth. My first reaction was to hold my breath, hoping the sound would disappear. But the footsteps continued, getting closer each time. Max, who was lying in the corner of the room, lifted his head, ears alert, confirming that he'd heard it too. A sense of insecurity took over, and I started to consider whether it was worth confronting whatever was happening or if I should just leave. The thought that someone might be walking around the house while I was there was too terrifying to ignore. I decided I couldn't ignore it any longer. With my hands trembling, I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. I stepped out of the room with Max right behind me, sniffing the air as if he sensed something strange too. I walked down the hallway, checking every corner, but everything seemed empty. I carefully made my way downstairs, keeping the flashlight pointed ahead, hoping no one was there. When I reached the ground floor, I noticed the back door was open again. A deep fear took hold of me, and all I wanted was to get out of there as quickly as possible. I grabbed my things, held Max by the leash, and we left the house in a hurry. Once I got to my car, I called the dog's owner and explained everything that had happened, telling him I didn't feel safe staying there. He sounded surprised and a bit skeptical, but he thanked me for letting him know. Later, I found out he had changed the locks and installed security cameras around the house. To this day, I wonder what or who might have been entering the house. But one thing is certain, I have no intention of going back to find out. I'm an avid hiker, and since I've explored various areas, I decided to venture into a remote part of a national forest that I had never visited before. The feeling of being in a new place, surrounded by ancient trees and the silence of nature, was refreshing. As I moved along the trail, the forest grew denser, but that didn't bother me. I've always been careful to mark my way back. At a certain point, I started noticing strange marks on the trees. They were symbols I couldn't identify, like geometric shapes and interwoven lines carved directly into the trunks. At first, I thought they might be some sort of marking left by other explorers or hunters. However, as I continued, the symbols became more frequent and intricate, covering entire trunks in some areas. With each new mark I found, a chill ran down my spine, and the peace I'd felt earlier began to fade. Shortly after, I began to hear faint, scattered sounds, like whispers or distant footsteps. It was hard to pinpoint where they were coming from. They seemed to be everywhere at once, as if the forest itself was whispering. The idea that I might have stumbled into private or even sacred territory began to make me uneasy, and I felt an increasing urge to find my way back before dark. As I tried to trace my way back, the feeling of being watched only intensified. Every time I looked around, it seemed like the shadows between the trees were moving as if something or someone was hiding. The forest, once a place of peace, now felt hostile and oppressive. The faint sounds continued, spaced out but ever present, as if following me at a safe distance. I looked at the symbols on the trunks and, for the first time, wondered if they were a warning for trespassers. The idea that I might be somewhere I shouldn't have been started to weigh on me, and fear began to take hold. The daylight was starting to disappear, and I knew I didn't have much time before nightfall. Focusing on finding my way back, I quickened my pace, but the terrain seemed increasingly confusing, and the sounds around me grew more persistent. At one point, I heard what sounded like muffled laughter coming from behind me. That was enough to make me stop in my tracks. I took a deep breath, trying to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks, but the panic had already set in. All I wanted was to get out of there as fast as possible and leave that strange place behind. As I walked faster, I realized that the markings on the trees now seemed to be directing me along a path I didn't want to follow. It was as if the symbols were leading me deeper into the forest instead of guiding me out. With each turn, each marked trunk, the feeling of being steered in an unwanted direction grew stronger. I kept glancing over my shoulder, almost expecting to see someone watching me from the trees, but all I saw were shadows and the oncoming darkness. I tried to stay calm, but the thought of being lost led further from my starting point, made me quicken my steps in desperation. Finally, I spotted a tree I recognized from when I first entered the forest. This gave me a sense of relief and filled me with a renewed determination to press on. However, the sounds didn't stop. The same persistent whisper, the distant sound of footsteps, and that occasional muffled laughter seemed to follow me as if they didn't want to let me go. The feeling that there was something or someone there with me, playing with my fear, was inescapable. As night drew closer, the sounds grew more spaced out, as if whatever presence in the forest was letting me go, but still watching. The way back finally started to make sense, and I could see the start of the trail where I'd entered. Even though exhaustion and relief washed over me, I kept glancing over my shoulder, feeling like I was being followed until the very last second. When I finally reached my car, I quickly shut the door and locked it before allowing myself a deep breath of relief. Inside the safety of the car, I could still feel the weight of the forest, as if something had tried to make me stay. As I drove away, I promised myself I'd never return to that place. Whatever those symbols or invisible presences were, I knew I wasn't welcome. Even now, days later, I still hear the echo of whispers and laughter when I'm alone, and the image of those symbols on the trees remains etched in my mind. What seemed like just another hike became a clear warning to respect the mysteries and secrets the forest holds.